Welcome to Night Coffee Crime. Today, we uncover one of the darkest and most chilling stories in history, one that stands out even among the most infamous criminals. Crime history is filled with ruthless gang leaders, cold-blooded killers, and criminals who thrived in the shadows. But then, there was Juanita Spinelli, a name unlike any other. She wasn't just another criminal. She was a mastermind, a manipulator, and the first woman ever executed in California. She was a leader, a strategist, and yet she commanded a dangerous crime syndicate with absolute authority. So, how did a seemingly ordinary woman transform into the feared leader of a deadly gang? And what led her to the execution chamber? This is the chilling story of Juanita Spinelli, a tale of betrayal, loyalty, and a descent into darkness. It's hard to separate fact from fiction when it comes to Juanita Spinelli. Her life was shrouded in mystery, and the stories surrounding her often blurred the line between reality and legend. But one thing is certain: before she formed her own gang, she was already running with some of the most dangerous criminals in the country. Spinelli was a former associate of the infamous Purple Gang, a ruthless and highly organized group that dominated Detroit's underworld during the Prohibition era. Known for their violent enforcement tactics and deep ties to bootlegging, the Purple Gang controlled illegal liquor distribution and struck fear into anyone who dared to cross them. Their reputation for brutality was so notorious that even law enforcement often hesitated to confront them directly. But then, Spinelli fled. By January 1940, she had arrived in San Francisco, leaving behind the Purple Gang and setting her sights on building her own criminal enterprise. By March, her influence had grown, and she had surrounded herself with a new network of criminals, including the likes of Simeon, Ives, Sherrod, and Hawkins. Together, they would form a gang unlike any other one, where Spinelli ruled with an iron grip. Juanita Spinelli didn't surround herself with seasoned criminals or hardened gangsters. Except for her common-law husband, Mike Simeon, her gang members were young, inexperienced, and easily manipulated. They weren't criminal masterminds. They were desperate, misguided, and, in many ways, disposable. Albert Ives, 23, was a petty criminal from San Francisco, known for his one-eyed appearance and reckless behavior. Robert Sherrod, just 19, was the youngest member of the gang, the baby of the group, yet still under Spinelli's ruthless control. Then there was Lorraine Gypsy Spinelli, also 19, not just a gang member, but Juanita's own daughter. She played a crucial role as the come-on girl, luring unsuspecting drunks into dark alleys where they were swiftly robbed. Gordon Hawkins, 21, was another young recruit, drawn into the gang's web like the others. And of course, there was Mike Simeon, 33, Spinelli's partner in both life and crime. At the center of it all was Juanita Spinelli, 50 years old, orchestrating every move like a calculated chess player, ensuring that her influence over her young recruits remained absolute. Juanita Spinelli wasn't just a leader, she was a mother. But not in the traditional sense. She didn't just care for her gang. She controlled them, shaped them, and trained them to be professional criminals. Her crew was young, reckless, and inexperienced. But under her guidance, they learned who to target, how to strike, and how to disappear without a trace. She focused on robbing drunk and vulnerable victims, easy targets that wouldn't draw too much attention. But Spinelli had one golden rule: no unnecessary killings. Murder meant police scrutiny, and she was too smart to let that happen. It wasn't just about crime, it was about loyalty. And she ensured it by playing the role of a caretaker. She cooked for them, cleaned up after them, and provided a home. But this wasn't love. This was control. She made them dependent on her, ensuring that they saw her not just as a leader, but as a mother figure they couldn't live without. Her dominance over the gang earned her a fitting nickname, the Duchess. After every robbery, she was the one who handled the money, confiscated the weapons, and made the final decisions. She had absolute authority, and no one dared to challenge her. For a time, everything ran smoothly, but control is never permanent, and even the strongest leaders can't stop what's coming next. Violence was never meant to be the first option, but sometimes all it took was one mistake, one wrong move for blood to be spilled. On April 8, 1940, Leland Cash, a 55-year-old barbecue stand operator, was closing up for the night on the San Francisco oceanfront when he became the target of a robbery. At some point during the encounter, Cash was given a command to put his hands up, but there was something the criminals didn't realize. He was deaf. He never heard the order. What happened next was swift and brutal. Albert Ives pulled the trigger, shooting Cash through the stomach. The 55-year-old collapsed, mortally wounded, his barbecue stand turning into a crime scene. In that moment, the gang's golden rule of avoiding unnecessary killings was broken. And no matter how carefully Juanita Spinelli controlled her crew, this was something even she couldn't undo. Fear can be just as dangerous as a gun. And for Robert Sherrod, fear would seal his fate. After the gang fled San Francisco in a stolen car and headed to Sacramento, Sherrod was visibly shaken. Pale and anxious, he couldn't stop rambling about the murder, his words spilling out in nervous desperation. At first, the others brushed it off, but then, he kept talking too much, too openly. Juanita Spinelli knew that loose lips were a liability, and in her world, liabilities didn't last long. The gang decided to get rid of him. They drove out to the Sacramento River, where they spent the day at what seemed like an innocent picnic. While Sherrod swam in the water, Spinelli and the others sat together, calmly discussing the best way to kill him. She didn't want him to suffer. Make it as painless as possible, she insisted. But mercy was never truly part of the plan. That evening, in their Sacramento hotel room, the gang put their plan into motion. Robert Sherrod was handed a glass of whiskey, a small act of camaraderie, except this drink was different. Laced with chloral hydrate, it was meant to ensure he wouldn't resist what came next. Juanita Spinelli herself had provided the drug. As the party carried on, Sherrod grew drowsy, his body betraying him before he even realized what was happening. Once he lost consciousness, the gang loaded him into the car and drove to the Freeport Bridge. There, they dressed the unconscious youth in swimming trunks before lifting him and throwing him into the cold waters of the Sacramento River. An accident. That's what they wanted it to look like. A tragic case of a young man who had one too many drinks and drowned. But the truth wouldn't stay buried beneath the surface for long. Sherrod's body was recovered sooner than the gang had expected, and the circumstances immediately raised suspicion. What was meant to look like a tragic drowning now had the police considering homicide. And once the authorities started digging, it was only a matter of time before the cracks in the gang began to show. This time, it was Ives who lost his nerve. He feared that Mrs. Spinelli would turn on him next, just as she had done to Sherrod. Paranoia set in, and rather than waiting for his fate to be sealed, he made a desperate move. He called the police. When officers arrested Spinelli, they made a crucial discovery. The very gun used in the barbecue stand holdup, the weapon that had taken the life of Leland Cash, was found in her possession. Ballistic tests confirmed it. The bullet recovered from Cash's body had come from Spinelli's gun. The so-called Duchess of Crime had finally run out of luck. The Duchess had finally fallen. A Sacramento jury found Juanita Spinelli, Gordon Hawkins, and Mike Simeon guilty of the murder of Robert Sherrod, sentencing them all to death in the gas chamber. But there was one exception: Albert Ives. Declared insane, he was sent to Mendocino State Hospital instead. Because of these verdicts, there was never a trial for the murder of Leland Cash. During the investigation, Spinelli pointed the finger at her own daughter, claiming that Lorraine was the one who had suggested drugging Sherrod. But despite her mother's attempt to implicate her, Lorraine Gypsy Spinelli was never charged with any crimes. For nearly a century, California had upheld the death penalty, but no woman had ever been executed until Juanita Spinelli. On November 21, 1941, just one day after eating a Thanksgiving meal in her cell, Spinelli was led to the gas chamber. She faced her fate before an audience of 65 journalists and 23 prison guards, making history as the first woman to be executed in California. A week later, Mike Simeon and Gordon Hawkins met the same fate, their crimes sealing their ultimate punishment. Juanita Spinelli built her legacy in the shadows, but in the end, there was no escaping justice. As the first woman to be executed in California, her story remains one of manipulation, betrayal, and a downfall as dramatic as her rise. What do you think about this case? Was Spinelli a criminal mastermind or simply a woman trying to survive in a ruthless world? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more true crime cases.